Nowadays, it seems that everywhere you look, there's a new development going up. But it wasn't that long ago when this was a rural county, just beginning to see dwellings being built. The first European settlers were tobacco planters who came here from the Chesapeake region in the early 1700s. Speculators held most of the land patents in this area. However, they didn't live here. The land was rented to tenant farmers who grew tobacco to export. The first farmsteads were established between 1750 and 1820. Because of the terrain, these tobacco plantations were small scale, usually consisting of 100 to 200 acres. These farmers lived in modest 1.5-story log dwellings with side-gabled roofs. The inside consisted of 1 or 2 rooms with a loft above, connected by a box staircase. In addition to the dwellings, there were what was called tobacco houses for drying the plants. There were smoke houses for preserving food, and there were slave quarters. This one is in Poolesville, where stone was used instead of the traditional log. A few farmers had the means to build larger and more substantial homes, like this brick gambrel roof structure in the Ashton area. By the late 1700s, the population in this area was changing. People from Pennsylvania migrated here in search of more and cheaper land. They brought with them farming practices that were German-influenced. They were more diversified than the early English tobacco planters. Grain production began to replace that of tobacco. Families ran farms and raised wheat, as well as livestock. The architecture was changing too. The most notable addition to the landscape was the bank barn. This large 2-story structure was banked into a hillside and served a variety of functions. The lower story was for stabling and was accessible from below. The upper story was a hayloft, which could be entered from the hillside. Houses of this era were typically 2-story simple abodes. Usually, there were 2 rooms upstairs and 2 rooms downstairs. Most had very little detail and were a 3-bay design. Notice the facade is divided into thirds, with 2 windows and a door. People with more wealth built mansions, like this brick federal-style structure near Sandy Spring. Slaves lived in places like the log portion of this Bethesda home, housing up to 12 people. This is where Josiah Henson lived. His writings inspired Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. After the Civil War, more people were coming to this area from other places. Between the network of roads, the C&O Canal, White's Ferry, and of course the railroad, access to and from Montgomery County was expanding. Heretofore, there had not been a widespread attempt at a conscious building design, but that was changing as county homeowners began adopting aspects of the Gothic Revival style. Popular nationally, Gothic Revival was a marriage of church architecture and Swiss building styles. The result was a highly decorative rural structure. Typical features include steeply pitched roofs with jigsawed barge board and pointed arch windows, all of which created a vertical feel to the houses. Here in Montgomery County, the most common house type during this time period is the 3 or 5 bay center cross gable house. While most were not high-style Gothic Revival, elements of this style were heavily used. As the 19th century was nearing an end, Montgomery County's suburbs were being born. With the opening of the metropolitan branch of the B&O Railroad, people could now quickly travel from Washington, D.C. into the countryside that was Montgomery County. Lyndon was the first railroad suburb. It was platted in 1873, the same year that the railroad opened. While the rural environment is long gone, traces of this original Silver Spring suburb can still be seen. The dominant architectural style during the latter part of the 19th century was Queen Anne, the style that is most associated with the Victorian period. The buildings are complex forms with gabled-roofed pavilions, polygonal bays, towers, and turrets. Expansive porches decorated by turned posts and spindlework became outdoor living spaces.